Hello, everyone. Welcome to This is Recruiting. If you're here for the first time, This is Recruiting is a webinar series that we at HackerEarth have created to bring in industry experts from across the world to tell you their stories about recruiting and share with you their insights and hopefully even a couple of tips that you can use in the future. If you're hearing about us for the first time, HackerEarth is a recruitment platform that's designed for tech recruiters. And we help you with your entire cycle of tech recruiting to improve your hiring efficiency. And the way we do this is through our complete suite of products. So we have everything that can help you from your entire cycle. That is from attracting and sourcing, screening and interviewing, upskilling, and even engagement. So what we offer, first and foremost, it is our assessments platform that helps you do completely skill-based hiring, absolutely bias-free. We have an incredibly large question bank. We have real life problems and questions that are updated constantly. We're probably the biggest in the market in terms of the questions that we have and the variety of questions that we have, including our pricing, which you can check out on hackerearth.com/recruit. I'll put the link there a little bit later. In case you're hiring developers remotely, you can hire them from across the world and interview them through our remote interviewing platform. And we have a tool that helps you discuss with your candidates, with your developers, as you're hiring them. You can put in questions and ask them to solve it in real time and watch how they attempt these problems. And finally, for hiring as well as upskilling and engagement, we conduct hackathons. So if you're interested in hackathons, if you're looking to engage your current tech teams, if you're looking to give them new problems or even find innovative ways for them to ideate, our hackathons are the place to go. I'm going to put the link in the comments for anyone who wants to check out our completely free demo. So you can go ahead and check out hackerearth.com/recruit. But before I get on too much about HackerEarth, I'd like to introduce you to our webinar guest today. So this is the first time that we're actually doing a session where we're just doing storytelling, where we're talking to an industry expert who has been through so many experiences in her recruiting life that she has at least what I consider a wide range of experiences to talk about. She's worked with different fields, different industries, and in different capacities. And she's currently working as a senior recruiter at ClickUp. Hi, Brooke. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us on this webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you everyone for joining. As she mentioned, my name is Brooke. I am a senior recruiter here at ClickUp. Right now, I'm focused on engineering, G&A, and sales hiring. So pretty much everything. I started really supporting revenue operations off the bat. And since then, we've had so many other hiring needs that I've kind of just jumped in and helped in different spaces. So again, super honored to be here. Thanks for taking some time to listen to my story, and hopefully I can share some valuable insights with you all as well. Wanted to kind of bring it back to, a bit back in the day, I guess you could say. When I was in college, I attended UNC Charlotte. So I was a business major there. I had a few jobs during school, and really, that was the case ever since I was 15. I always felt, having that independence, having that value of what money can earn early on was actually very empowering to me. So I really knew that I wanted to make a beautiful life for myself one way or the other. So trying to figure out, what that means along the way. So, in some reflection and seeing my mom, as kind of being that person I looked up to and idolized, she did phenomenal work within financial advising. So I really thought, I want to focus my career path within business. I'm not sure exactly if I want to go into financial advising, but I knew if I didn't explore that path that I may not ever know. So with that being said, I saw the value really in what that life could bring, just having flexibility to attend my sporting events or, just having, enough money to put food on the the table, things that are really valuable long-term. So that was my thought process. That's all I had to kind of go into it with. I decided to eventually claim finance as my major and pursue financial advisory path so that, I would never have to look back and wonder if this was my true passion and the legacy I wanted to leave. So I started interviewing with various financial firms based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. The remote piece and aspect was not really a thing back then, as you guys know. So otherwise, I probably would have tried to explore that too. But when it came to, interviewing and just knowing how competitive I was in sports and just, who I am as a person, I wanted to be with the best. Everyone wants to join, the best opportunity for them. But for me, I was looking at, what companies have the top internship programs, where can I really grow, and really at the same time, just learn a lot from an internship program. So I did look into, a few different companies. Northwestern Mutual caught my eye off the bat. They had a world-renowned top 10 internship program in the world. So for me, I was like, this is pretty exciting. You can actually be able to go in, have a hands-on feel with actually what you're going to be doing, and have some of those live conversations with people and help them with finances. So I was like, well, this is amazing. I can actually get my hands dirty a little bit, see what it feels like, because, as I fast forward with them, I did get licensed. I got licensed to, sell life and health, disability insurance, and long-term care. So from a knowledge standpoint, I was, I was really proud of that piece and being like, I can do this. This could be a fun avenue. But once you realize, what that day-to-day looks like, it's constant sourcing, as we call it in recruiting, but you're prospecting as well. And, it's kind of that selling role. For me, I found a lot of value out of relationships, and I knew I wanted to continue to make an impact in some sort of way going forward in my future. And as I continued on within that internship program, I was able to shadow and build great relationships, kind of bring my passion to the forefront with helping people. But I quickly realized that, doing that on a day-to-day basis was not something I was overly passionate about. I wanted to, make an impact in a different way. For me, it was really important to have an opportunity where I could continue to connect with people, not just at a surface level. When you're talking about financial advising, you're really talking about life and death and all of these, very impactful things. But for me, I had never even thought of recruiting. Like most people, we kind of fall into recruiting more than we, find a path into recruiting necessarily. Then I just knew that, tying myself to a book of business within financial services is a very long-term career path. Otherwise, you're kind of handing that off, right? So for me, I was hardworking. I was fine with that 100% commission. Let's try it out. But at the end of the day, I expressed that, hey, I've brought in a couple interns into this program. I've really enjoyed going to the career fairs and kind of being a part of that entire process to change someone's life, to know, like, what is their true purpose, their passion. So for me, that's kind of how I expressed to Northwestern that, I'd love to have an impact within this company. And I think what we're doing is phenomenal. So I became a campus ambassador, started going to the career fairs. I started interviewing. So that was, obviously very empowering at a young age to kind of jump in and really start understanding people. A lot of interviewing is kind of understanding those soft skills. And within that financial services role, I was really looking at a lot of selling type profiles and backgrounds. Yes. So, really kind of getting a handle on, what makes people tick, what's exciting to them, what's their body language, all of that fun stuff. And that for me was amazing. Going forward, I was graduating, trying to figure out what I was going to do. My mom was like, hey, are you coming back home, or are you going to have a job whenever you graduate? So I decided to join Northwestern Mutual. I was very grateful that they actually created a campus recruiter position, knowing that I was about to graduate. So the timing couldn't have been.
Oh, they created a position for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that, in my own mind, right, young mind, I was like, wow, I mean, they just, must have a lot of money to be able to just create a position like that. Do they
Oh,
even really
like,
need me?
very impressed with you.
Right. I was like, this is great. I don't care what you pay me. I will be there. I was just so excited to be a part of that company and knew that there was going to be a lot to learn, a lot that I didn't know already. But, surrounded by good people. And I knew it was just that work hard, play hard mentality. So I've always loved kind of that challenge of, trying to be the best, trying to do the best and things like that. So started that recruiting career path more on the campus recruiting side. So I was traveling a bit more, going to various events, interviewing people on the phone and in person, which I kind of miss the in-person piece a little bit too. But, we actually used paper and pen while I was interviewing people in person. That today sounds a very old school way of thinking and would not be conducive, to be quite honest. So, I learned so much, again, just about, how people interact in person and those soft skills. Really built really great relationships at Northwestern Mutual. I knew that they didn't have quite the growth that we were looking for within the campus team, or maybe doing some full-time recruiting. So I did get approached by a public accounting firm. So I expanded my horizon a little bit, and they were, headquartered in Charlotte. I'd be, going to Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, USC, some really big schools. On the public accounting side, it works completely different than anything that I would have ever experienced before. So, I was looking at different profiles within that industry and really traveling all over to attend different events. Quite honestly, I was throwing lavish events for accounting students. We're competing against the Big Four. As you can imagine, I was representing Dixon Hughes Goodman. So they're not quite in the Big Four, but very much successful, mid-sized public accounting firms. So, I had a challenge in itself going up against Wake Forest and some of those schools that the Big Four was really, really well renowned there. So, we threw a few different events, and one of them we created nitrogen ice cream. We actually took a group of accounting students to Charleston and pretty much, sold them on DHG's culture and all of this. So the team bonding and experiences and just facilitating that, and a lot of the coordination that had to go into it and preparation was something that was, super valuable for me to have. But I do feel like it took away a large amount of the time that I used to spend interviewing people. So I kind of lost a little bit of that connection because I was, putting really fantastic students up with, phenomenal leaders like partners and managers who would then decide, who we would bring on and continue to offer. So with that piece of it a little left out, I was approached by Northwestern Mutual again, and obviously have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart there. So with that void, I decided to join them, and they wanted me to come on as a full-time career recruiter. So not just interns, maybe a little bit of interns I supported, but mostly on the full-time side. And I completely pivoted my focus and, just my frame of mind, because I wasn't, talking to kids who had zero experience anymore. And we were really looking and targeting folks who had maybe former military backgrounds, former athletes, different professionals at various stages in their career. So it gave me a breadth of experience and exposure to different types of people. And this was an opportunity. I just knew I could make a huge impact. And of course, I love the people at Northwestern Mutual. So was really happy to be able to come on in a larger capacity and grow. I became the agency recruiter of the year in 2016. So that was an amazing achievement for me. Our agency covered North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia. So, we had at least 8 to 10 different recruiters at any given time. So after that point, I was able to really jump in and start start coaching different recruiters and helping. I had my own intern at one time, kind of helping build out some projects. And so that strategic piece, that relationship piece, and me being able to actually give back some of the things that I had learned was awesome. So from that, I did some great things at Northwestern Mutual. And when it was time to explore something different, I wanted to make sure I was making a mark at the same level, and at a local company who had the Best Places to Work award. So for me, surrounding yourself and continuing to up level in that way and just being cognizant of where you're putting yourself is super important as a recruiter. There, I was able to not just focus on sales, so kind of those sales advisory backgrounds, but I focused on, finance, accounting, vendor management, sales, marketing, pricing, you name it. There was a service center, so many different roles that I had never had any exposure to. So when I joined them, they had about 110 employees, and we were growing to 170 or 180 by the end of the year. So that year, I quite literally hired 55 full-time employees with just a handful of interns. So it was very, very busy. I learned quickly just some productivity hacks that kind of helped me in my day-to-day, like time blocking and things of that nature. I was able to be strategic and create that Canvas recruiting plan. And really, I was kind of their go-to, right? There was no coordinator, there was no sourcer, there was no support. I was kind of just like owning anything and everything that came my way. So I loved that piece of it. So that company got acquired and had a different view of what HR and recruiting would be. So a little bit less existent, unfortunately. And so in 2020, in the midst of all the COVID craziness, I was let go along with my team members and had recently actually lost a family member not related to COVID. So for me, I took just a few weeks, and things to just, to take a step back, reflect, because I felt a little unprepared for what was to come next. And obviously the world was just kind of unprepared in general with what COVID brings. So after much reflection and a little time off, I decided to try what I would call a unique and fun industry. And so I went with Cricket. So it's different than the wireless store Cricket, but this company really focused more on different types of crafts and machinery that you can use to be entrepreneurial. So if you've seen people on Etsy and some of those different apps that we have today, so you're kind of encouraging people to be their best self and do something they enjoy. And I was like, well, this will be fun. I'm going to take this contract opportunity. I knew one of the recruiters working there, so I felt really good about that piece of it. I knew going in that there was going to be, kind of massive growth underway. But at the same time, there was actually a freeze on hiring. So once they wanted to offer me full time, I did accept that. And then about 5 months after that, they did a hiring freeze and it continued on. And then we had the opportunity to pick if we wanted to stay or if we wanted to get a severance. I decided to stay and I wanted to support them. I really believed that, some of the growth would kind of fall right back into place and we'd be, up and running with more recruiting on our plate and things like that. And during that time frame, I caught up with a dear friend, Chris Cunningham, who is the founder of ClickUp. He's very entrepreneurial and hardworking. I knew whatever he was a part of was going to more than likely be very successful. And I just, didn't realize the massive growth that was underway. So me just, kind of tipping my toe into the waters there, having a backup plan, if you will, was really what I was kind of thinking. I started learning a little bit more about ClickUp and it being a software company, something that for me, I knew, getting into the software industry can bring you just so much growth. It's completely different, I think, than a lot of other industries out there. They all work a little different, but for me, that was going to be an opportunity again of just massive growth for myself. For me, a bit out of the comfort zone, and we were in hyper growth mode. So to kind of give you some perspective, I joined last year in November, and just last year, ClickUp grew from 70 to 700 employees. So we 10x'd in size, which is crazy growth. We're sitting around 1,000 right now. So with this experience being almost, a full year in, I've grown, not only as just an employee, but as a person for myself, being more productive than I ever have, understanding, what that industry field is like, especially different competitors and how we want to attract talent and things of that nature. So, as you can probably tell from what I've shared, I've mostly learned to kind of grow and perform, and everything from my individual challenges. I've certainly had a lot of folks, more so at the management level or maybe other teams, to kind of help decompress and share ideas and bounce ideas off of. But truly, this is the first company where that cohesiveness has really shined through for me. It's been nice to just have such high collaboration between not only just our team, but the other teams at ClickUp. It's been nice from like a knowledge standpoint, to just be able to learn, and people be so vocal, right, about their opinions, which I think is different than in some industries that stay a little bit more close, tight knit, and maybe careful of how you say it and what you're saying. So, some people speak toward.
Sorry.
Go for it.
I just wanted to ask you, your experience so far, like what I've been getting, you went from finance and then went to like financial recruiting, and then, mostly stayed in that thing. And you said, right, joining ClickUp gave you a lot of perspective into software recruiting and how that works. So how did you make that shift exactly into getting into tech recruiting? Because a lot of our audience members are sometimes recruiters who are trying to get into tech recruiting, but don't really have the know-how or, the software experience. And they always struggle with, what are the things you need to know before getting into a job like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to being able to really speak with someone on the inside of any of those companies and kind of picking their brains, to be honest. I didn't come with like the recruiting software that we use here. I didn't come with that, the HR system. Honestly, I'm supporting the engineering space, but it is a space that is newer to me, and they were okay with that. So a lot of it comes down to the soft skills that you have, but then at the same time, you want to be able to kind of leverage your thought process and how you attract talent. So for me, I shared a lot around activity, what it takes, right, to land maybe a high level executive. It's hard to necessarily equate that to an engineering hire, but it's very similar in the respect that you have several touch points. You are, really looking to make sure that candidate experience is super top notch. And so getting into those conversations and painting a picture as to, what you've brought to the table and how you've executed in other areas is definitely the best place to start. And also just doing some research, as you're speaking with different companies and throwing your interest out there, sharing some statistics about that competitor in competitor, realm and what that means to you and how you would attack the market. Because to be quite honest, this is probably, the position that I've had the most sourcing responsibility with. I know in each company, you try to have a good balance kind of within both, but, in a startup, you don't always have that brand awareness right away. So I felt like we did in California, but, we're still kind of building upon that. So hopefully that's helpful.
So that's another question, that I think I've seen a lot with startups who are looking to, just get out into the recruiting side, and they're recruiting, but they don't have brand presence to leverage, right? I'm sure you had a lot when you were with Northwestern Mutual. You would have had, like, people knew who they were. People would, instantly be attracted to the company just because they've heard so much. But, in the other smaller ventures that you've been a part of, how did you tackle the whole brand challenge there? What did you use, as like a employer branding message or something to attract employees?
Yeah, no, that's great. And of course, it's different than just like the general population. You're trying to get your name out there, right? So for us, we have at least at ClickUp a phenomenal creative team. So check out our Super Bowl ad. It's kind of comical and lighthearted, and we do different things like that. We have billboards, we have buses and planes that are, or not planes, excuse me, airports. That would be awesome, though, if we had ClickUp plastered on planes. Maybe that's next. For that piece of it, there's a lot that you can do to just kind of get that reach out there. For us, it's been imperative to kind of have in each of my roles LinkedIn. So having an actual LinkedIn page that the employer is representing, because so many people are using LinkedIn right now. And so that's super important when it comes down to sourcing. And I touch on this a little bit later too, but personalizing your outreach, depending on who you're talking to, whether it's from that growth standpoint, right? Where yes, we're a startup, but we raised 500 million, and we're valuated at 4 billion. So, painting the picture and having some of those bullets that are, really going to entice someone to listen. Because I've found, especially a lot of the folks in the software industry, you're either kind of part of big tech, or you maybe have gone through a startup phase, or you're on the tail end of it, right? So, and I've noticed a lot of folks really want a flavor of each at some point. You always want what you can't have, and it's nice to just have like a little bit of a different experience too. So for me, I highlight how you can make an impact on, specific projects and how we're looking to get to, IPO in 2024, and all of that just kind of raises awareness. It's kind of like, how do we catch their attention off the bat? So those are a few ways that have certainly been really helpful in my time.
That's awesome. I think, especially given that you have like a great creative team, it must be so much more easier than for the branding part of it. You mentioned candidate engagement, I think, a little bit before. So I just wanted to come to that. I think when we last spoke, you mentioned a couple of things that you were working on right now: candidate experience, communication, and, a couple of things that I've noticed come up a lot again in our recruiter community. We also had a webinar where we did, just completely on post offer candidate engagement. So I just, do you have like a couple of tips for our audience right now, and things that you're doing and things that you're learning right now, especially in tech, keeping candidates engaged?
Absolutely. Numerous touch points when you're sourcing on the front end, I think, is really important. There's a lot of different tools out there. We've been utilizing Gym for some outreach, so that you can really create and personalize, who you're speaking with. The subject line within that, honestly, is a huge differentiator in the response rate there. So if you're, capturing the exact title, the exact team, 4 billion, startup, that kind of thing, within that tagline, people are going to, notice. And I think on the onset of just building that rapport, being transparent, being genuine in that messaging, and targeted is really the best way to do it. When it comes to, candidate communication, once you get them on the phone, for me, it's more about having a genuine open dialogue. So kind of getting their barriers down. I've been in, companies where it's a little bit more black and white as to, we need to answer all these 10 questions and really get that, buttoned up feedback and keep it very, very professional. There's a way in which you can go about, being professional and kind of making it a little bit more conversational, which will kind of let down the ease and the barriers for folks that you're speaking with. And the way that, I kind of break the ice to begin with folks, how was your day? How was your weekend? How's the weather there? Small talk. It also lets you just see, how open that person is, or maybe how interested they are to even talk to you. So it gives you kind of a filter off the bat. I love to kind of just say, hey, have you learned about ClickUp before? Or how familiar are you? Kind of gauge how to continue that conversation. How hard do I need to lean into, letting them understand certain areas of our culture or whatnot that might get brought up on the front end. But understanding their motivators is also key in helping understand that flow off the bat too. So for me, it's high touch points with candidates. Even after that point, there's the normal scheduling, coordination, but actually getting on the phone and calling them to check in. A lot of recruiters, and you'll hear different people just openly tell you about their bad candidate experiences and things like that. Things happen. There's times where, I might have been late to a call or something like that by a couple minutes. And it's something that, would happen, also happens on the flip end, right? It's good to just hit that head on, right? We're all people. There's no bad intention there. But there have been people in the market who have been really hurt or maybe never followed up with before, that stings pretty hard. And that initial, communication with them and follow through means a lot more than you think it does. And they'll remember that. So even if they're not, a candidate for right now, always pipeline those folks and have a cadence of following up and keeping in touch and adding them on LinkedIn. Also just providing constructive feedback. I know it's something that can get a little, messy and from a recruiter's perspective, and we always want to make sure that we're not muddying the waters there to where we would get in trouble. But, as transparent as you can be, I've often noticed, if you can give that feedback over the phone and really let them know how much you appreciated their time, and there's a couple, tidbits of information for their own feedback and knowing, then that's great. Some people will never ask, but the ones that you've maybe spent 5 to 6 interviews with, it's a high level candidate, a leadership role, to not leave, someone like that hanging, I think is incredibly important as well.
Right, definitely. And about culture, how do you position, ClickUp's culture or in general, like startups? How is that different from the way you position, larger companies? Because I think everyone knows startups have more of like a hustle culture. Sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. And I think I've seen it. See, I've worked with startups my entire life, but everyone always says, no, you know what? It's high growth and it's going to be intense, but it's going to be great. And sometimes it lives up, sometimes it doesn't. So what do you do about culture there?
Yeah. So, some people speak towards a growth mindset with their company values or when describing culture, but being able to tangibly express and share examples of this, I think is key. If you're in a startup, you more than likely have or seeking that growth mindset that maybe you haven't had before. Personally, I've seen at ClickUp where employees have taken on new responsibilities. Maybe they've come in as an individual contributor. They've gotten promoted, in months versus like having, that regular cadence within more of a corporate big tech environment. And even myself, I'm even though I'm a senior recruiter, I'm directly managing a sourcer and a coordinator right now. And that's because I spoke up and, said I wanted to take on and really lean into this to help other people grow and to, also help just our overall recruiting team. As I know everyone is working hard too. So for us on the front end, we are very transparent that it's one where it's a fun, hardworking environment, but incredibly rewarding if you're looking to make that impact. And I can point to those examples depending on the level of candidate I'm talking to. They might not care so much about my example, but they might really care that, a manager, an IC manager was able to bring on, some direct reports sooner than later. And that just happened, a month back or so. So, that's one thing I've noticed. You've also in a startup absolutely have to master the ability to pivot with your time and energy on a daily basis. So in recruiting, we already do that. There's a given. There's no sugarcoating. We just constantly have to do that as a nature of our job. So say that you throw a few processes that aren't completely established or in place, that makes for a fun adventure. So you have to really, kind of look at it that way. So, daily you're kind of setting your mind to tackle a little bit of both defense and offense in a sense. So you don't miss some of those crucial value adds. So, any recruiter getting into a startup, for example, we've implemented Workday here just like last week. So it's been a little crazy with the transition of getting, working with Greenhouse, our ATS, as well as formerly Rippling and kind of moving things over. But 3 of our recruiters stepped up and, we're creating SOPs around the best practices and how to input and track and what hiccups we're running into. And it's nice when you have an operational person to run some of that. But in the circumstance where maybe that void is there, there's a lot of opportunity for impact to be made. So that's just one example I have. I also feel like it's so normal and truly okay for us to try new things and it not work out. It's very much one of those environments where it's refreshing in the sense that you're able to speak up and really have a voice in creative solutions. And we really want to bring on, folks who think outside the box. But, you're in an actual culture that allows you to do that as long as you're respectfully kind of speaking your point of view. We absolutely love that level of collaboration. So I think that's something that's an encouragement where when you get into maybe some of the bigger companies with a little bit more red tape, there's maybe only so much that you could really advise that could actually be listened to and heard. So that's a huge differentiator that I've noticed as well.
I'm just going to take a quick digress here because I have a question from someone in the audience who is asked, when you were recruiting for a very early stage startup, you had to take on many hats. How did you manage to do the work of a sourcer and a screener and everything while recruiting for a single company?
Great question. So with that, we use ClickUp to be productive with our time, of course, but we use ClickUp as our ATS as well. So that was an interesting learning, kind of off the bat. When I first started, we actually didn't have Greenhouse at that time. So going through that transition was just another growth opportunity there. But, one way that we've really, stayed productive throughout all of that is we don't use email internally whatsoever. Externally, of course, with candidates. But, for us, being able to jump into a live Zoom, a live Slack, get your question answered, be able to just be overly communicative and collaborative was absolutely necessary. We have a series of productivity, type of hacks, if you will, but really, just staying super organized within my browser, having different resources at your fingertips, having certain messaging and ways in which we're creating ClickUp's culture and making sure that comes through in emails, but being able to do so very quickly, kind of at your fingertips, and creating those templates was imperative. Creating different browser hacks too, having those tabs and just places that you can go to that you're going to be working out of on a regular basis. And I have multiple screens, so I have to stay organized because you have your notes here, you have different things there. And for me, it was something that I was like, I'm going to have to order 2 more of these just so I can keep everything really organized right in front of me and kind of get in a really systematic approach. At the end of the day, we want to make sure we're tackling based on priority and urgency, right? So we go through that with our hiring managers in detail to say, hey, you've got, say you have 20 roles, 5 of them have got to be, a little bit more urgent than the other 15. So let's really talk through what that looks like and put some intentionality behind that for the next 1 to 2 weeks. So those kickoff meetings become very, very valuable and important. So you have to just learn to be really efficient with the type of questions that you're asking within that moment, and create a cadence that works best for you and the hiring manager. I try to best practice have one once a week, but during that time, there was a lot of asyncs and a lot of different meetings that people maybe had overlapping. So we did, the best we could from that point as well.
Okay, awesome. I hope that answers your question. Uh, yeah, so getting back to, the things that you've been working on right now, you also mentioned that you're doing a lot of training right now as well, right? Where you're training newer recruiting specialists coming in or talent acquisition and things like that. And how's that going for you? How do you find that? And, what are some pointers that you can give us on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Training is key. I feel like you come in at least here, or any organization for the first 2 to 4 weeks, and you're just soaking it all in. For me, I think it's really helpful to have shadowing sessions. So I really break down the actual process that we're doing. Each recruiter that's been full cycle desk recruiter, or maybe they have never before, you have a way in which that you like to work. You may just not exactly know that yet, or maybe you do. So for me, it's sharing some of those best practices that will really help kick off your day in a good way. I think having a personal life too, that's in a healthy habit, whether you're waking up early or things like that, just to be conscious of, is very helpful as well. But you have to spend one-on-one time. We certainly set up some cadence within our ClickUp tool where we have SOPs and ways in which that they can go through the process to link the different integrations and tools that we have. Speaking of like now Greenhouse or Gym, some of those talent resources. So the more comfortable one gets off the bat using the tools themselves, the more successful that they're going to be. So I stress that very much so. I also think it's great to be able to jump in and shadow not just myself, but other recruiters on the team, because everyone has a little bit different style, and the which they're doing that as well. And I typically try to run, 20-minute recruiter screens. So it's not quite at 30. Sometimes they run over, sometimes they're a little shorter too. So, even training around, managing your time and what that looks like given the amount of recs or the amount of pivots you might have to make. For me, for example, I've, working across different lines of business with different interview processes and totally different candidate profiles. So, we take really, really well notes within our ClickUp task for each hiring manager so that each week we can bump and say, we looked at X amount of candidates or we sourced X amount of candidates and here's the result from that. So those constant touch points, but really just learning that full cycle of what's going to work best in this environment compared to maybe what worked well, at Northwestern or one of my other experiences. It's interesting to reflect on because, I've grown so much and I feel like I do so much more with less amount of time sometimes here. So, it can be done. I think it's a mental adjustment and it's also, just repetition with some of those best practices as you come on board.
Awesome. So I'm just going to digress again because we have another question. And this is not so much related to the things that you've been speaking about so far, but more, I think, from a general HR perspective, especially, this is a topic that I see coming up a lot about moonlighting. So I think someone here has asked for your opinion on moonlighting and whether it's something that you encourage as part of a startup, because you already have so many different roles happening in a startup. Is it something that, you've seen being helpful, or what are your thoughts on it?
So when you say moonlighting, essentially having like an extracurricular or another job that you're kind of tied to outside of that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have not done that. I would say to forwardly fall into recruiting as much as you can, especially, I don't know the circumstance. If you're experienced, then you'll kind of have a little bit more insight on maybe, what that full cycle looks like, what your workload and how you can manage your time. Most of my opportunities, I've been able to, stay within that 8 to 5 timeframe and execute very well. In the startup, there are certainly times where some pressing priorities parties or maybe an offer or something, needs to get out at a different time. Interesting point there. I'm East Coast. Our company is based in Pacific time zone. So now that, the world is more remote, depending on the industry, the people, essentially the team that you're representing, might affect the time zone and the hours that you're supporting on either side. So I would definitely look into that because there could be an overlap. But I will say that, it's been a very fulfilling career for me. It's one that I know you can continue to grow and make more money and, kind of build in maybe some of those passionate type projects or strategic initiatives that you're looking for. So personally, it wouldn't be something that I would take on, especially in the startup world. I do think it could be more manageable. If you have, if you're looking to work towards your master's or you're looking to have a job in the evenings, there are some corporate opportunities out there that will absolutely kind of allow for that flexibility without you feeling too overwhelmed. So.
Yep, I think that's fair. It's always hard in a startup. There's always too many things going on. And I mean, they keep you on your toes quite a bit. So if you do find time to moonlight, that itself is an achievement.
I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about, the resources that you've used so far as a recruiter. I know you mentioned a few and you've been talking a lot about what you've done in ClickUp, but what about your previous experiences as a campus recruiter and even as an agency recruiter? What are some resources that have helped you or even tools that have helped you in your recruiting journey and things that, maybe some of our recruiters should look out for?
Yeah, great question. I've used a series of different ATSs, Smart Recruiter, Greenhouse, and Lever. There's so many out there. They all work a little bit differently, but normally you're able, if you've experienced one or two, you can kind of jump in and better understand where things are located as well. I love having an ATS. I have been in positions before, like Northwestern Mutual, where we didn't have an ATS. You're creating Excel spreadsheets and things are much more manual, and all the information is not in one place. So wherever you can, kind of bring all of that to one is most important to be successful in full cycle recruiting. And then LinkedIn Recruiter, hands down, is probably my best friend. So finding talent, which could be sad to say, I guess, but we leverage that tool so much in being able to connect with candidates and LinkedIn in general, right? You kind of can create your presence online and share different information that might be attracting folks to follow your page or follow your company. Ways in which you can kind of just leverage that is important. Gym has been a gem for us. It's definitely been one where we've been able to share how we would, maybe attract a candidate, how we would message them, kind of get them on the hook, so to speak, so that you can have a live conversation with them as well. I often find that sometimes we have folks who are like, what is the compensation? What is the compensation range? And you get some of those immediate responses all the time. So you have to just think really strategic. And a lot of that is not going to come necessarily from a tool or a system. And so those are the things that I think can bog down your time if you're not thinking of what that looks like, on the forefront. We also use Talent Wall, and that gives you a really clean kind of snapshot of your recruiting cycle and what phase each candidate may be in. So it's an incredible tool to be able to, leverage with hiring managers and saying, we've seen X amount get to, hiring manager screen, to the third interview or to that panel interview. Why are we seeing fallout? This number should probably be around X percentage. So you can kind of story tell and really get more into the metrics there. Here at ClickUp, that's where we've used the majority of our metrics. And now that we're switching, systems with Greenhouse and Workday, we'll be pulling reports and getting a little bit more intentional from that side. there are a lot of different technical, type of recruiting tools as well that we're able to leverage. And one of them that we most recently have been using and I've helped implement is Hirefly. So that is where they're kind of teeing up some passive folks that might be looking and sending out on your behalf, attracting folks in essentially within the school. And you're able to kind of go in there and see the different profiles. And, there's certainly, there's a cost involved with any of these, but that is much more minimal than using an agency. So just leveraging, different tools like that we found. We're still kind of in the, testing phase, if you will. But we've had a lot of, strong profiles that are coming through and a lot of great feedback from our hiring managers, just with the up in the amount of candidates that we're able to kind of get in each week to week.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is super helpful. To anyone in our audience right now, we will compile these list of tools that Brooke has mentioned, and we'll probably send it out to you a little later when we send out the video as well. We're almost at the end of our webinar. Very surprisingly, I did not realize the time went by that quickly. But if you have any other questions, please do put it in on the Q&A panel, or you can message me on the chat, as most of you have been doing so far. But for now, I think one of the last questions that, we wanted to discuss, you mentioned a lot of productivity tips and hacks and everything that, you've been doing so far. And at least, you've hinted at some of them, but can you give us a deeper view of what you've been doing and how do you stay productive as a recruiter?
Yes, absolutely. So time blocking, I think, is just the number one. There's a lot of different, productivity hacks you can have when it comes to setting up your workspace. But actually going into your calendar, and I color code my calendar. So, in the morning, to probably too much detail here, but, I try to get a workout in 3 times a week. I do my meditation on gratitude for 20 minutes, and then I kick off my day. So because my mind is really fresh in the morning, I like to knock out a lot of the sourcing that I'm doing. So I'll time block at least 1 hour, most of the time 2 hours. And that's tackling, anywhere from 2 to 4 roles, just depending on priorities and things like that. So that's been really impactful to my day because we can tee up some of that outreach to be sent maybe later in the evening, or depending on the flow that you already have from last week, you can kind of strategize that from there. And then I have what I call more offensive mode throughout the day. So I'm pretty much on and in recruiter screens back to back every 20 to 30 minutes up until close to the end of the day, probably around 4 p.m. Eastern time. And because I do recruit in Pacific, it's not always 4 p.m. Eastern time. I flex a little bit, right? Sometimes I'll start my day later and things like that too. So you just kind of have to learn, what works best for you. But being able to jump in and make that impact in a very short time span. I feel like my day just flies by. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at my notifications within ClickUp, anything, maybe strategic we've been working on as a team to close out things like that. I'm also doing candidate follow-ups at the end of the day. I have a working session with my coordinator for 30 minutes during that time as well, so that she's doing any touch points with candidates and having kind of a second overlook at the same time. And then, if there's anything kind of extracurricular that I need to be focused on, like a project for our team, I've been working on kind of the candidate communication piece. I'll do, maybe a little of that in the evening or kick it off in the morning when my mind is fresh again. So hopefully that's helpful. I know time blocking for me has been critical, and it's a lot easier said than done because we're in Slack all day. So even though I said we don't do email, we are constantly collaborating. So, even for right now, pausing notifications, putting it to the side until you're done within that interview. Also just making sure that whatever ATS you're using, you feel comfortable with it. You can submit your scorecards or your notes, whatever you call it. And, not having a backlog of little things to do and working efficiently is super helpful. So give yourself, I do my 20-minute meeting because I can have 5 to 10 minutes to make sure some of that that information is getting in. Sometimes I'm going ahead and scheduling that next step. So those are a few tidbits.
I think those are super helpful. I mean, not just if you're a recruiter, but anyone, time blocking, having those little bit periods of the day and stuff as well. Super insightful. With that, I think, we're done with a whole hour. I did not realize that at all. But Brooke, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great session. It's been so interesting hearing about your entire story, about where you came from, how you pivoted. I think, like you said, a lot of people don't start off with recruiting, they kind of fall into it. And that's something that I've seen a lot with, most of our webinar guests as well, who come in as like totally different professions and then just fall into recruiting because they're just so passionate about the people aspect of it. And it's been great to hear your story and your achievements so far about growing ClickUp, about, starting off from where you did Campus Recruiting Agency Recruiter of the Year and everything in between. Thank you so much for taking the time to come here. And I hope I can see you again on maybe some other webinar in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Please feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I love sharing any tidbits. If we need to dive deeper with anyone that's on the call, seriously reach out. I am super excited again to just be able to spend a little bit of time with you guys this morning. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for setting this up.
Yep, definitely. Have a great rest of the week and great rest of the day. And to anyone here who's with us, please do fill in our survey form at the end of this webinar so that we can get your opinions on what you'd like to see, whether you'd like to see any particular topic coming up, and whether you'd like to check out some more of our resources. With that, we're ending this webinar. Thank you to everyone who joined. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week. Bye-bye. Thanks again, Brooke.